Hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking to you, but I'm also talking to invisible people. So if I'm not looking at you, I still have an audience in mind. But welcome to the first of several series of lectures and presentations. We're lucky to have some presentations in person, such as Dr. Kathryn Babayan's. The others are going to be on Zoom. I think it's nice to come to a room when somebody's zoomed in, as well as being at home and listening to the lectures from home or your office. But we try to have a live audience as well as a virtual audience. And today we even have the added pleasure of having a live speaker with us today. So our today's talk is Family Archives and Female Spaces of Intimacy. This is a project that our guest has been working on for quite some time. I'll just introduce her or give you a biographical note, and she'll just take it from there. Kathryn Babayan is a professor of Middle East Studies at the U of M. She specializes in social history and culture of the early modern Persianate world, gender studies, and the history of sexuality. She has been awarded a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship for 2024-25. So that they didn't decline that one, right?
In April they did.
Yeah, okay.
At the end of it, they did.
Oh, they stopped funding it? Oh, but you got some? Okay, got more. Sorry. You're better than...
That was the last.
Yes, you got the last bit that you yanked it out. Babayan is the author of 2 award-winning books, Mystics, Monarchs, and Messiahs, Cultural Landscape of Early Modern Iran from Cambridge, Harvard University Press, and The City as Anthology, Eroticism and Urbanity in Early Modern Isfahan from Stanford University Press. Babayan has also co-authored Slaves of the Shah, New Elites of Safavid Iran, with Susan Babayi, Aina Bagdians, McCabe, and Mesume Farhad, which came out from Taurus in 2004, and co-edited 2 books of Islamic and sexuality translations across temporal geographies of desire with Afsane Najmabadi from Harvard University Press 2008, and an Armenian Mediterranean Words and Worlds in Motion with Michael Pfeiffer from Cham, a Swiss publisher. She's also guest edited a special issue of Michigan Quarterly Review on contemporary Iranian literature, which was a great pleasure for me to at least be another host for one of her many talents. So please welcome a dear friend and esteemed historian, scholar of Iran, Professor Kathryn Babayan.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all of you who, I guess I can't move, but I do move around. For all of you who are here, and for all of those who have Zoomed in, I'm going to talk to you today about a Masnavi, which is a mystical poem of around 1,200 verses, written by a woman probably in the 1670s, 1680s in Isfahan. It's an exceptional piece. If you've read the article, you would have had a taste of it, but I'll give you a little bit more of the taste of that poetry today. It's exceptional, but I think, we'll talk a little bit about why it's exceptional. But that exceptional cases historically always tell you something about the norm. And there is a relationship between what is normative, and then as a social historian also what gets to be considered as a very rare voice. Hers is a rare voice, and I'll give you today a little bit of a context before I go and dive into her Masnavi, her poetry itself, for you to get a taste of how she writes and how she imagines and lives in this world as she travels to Mecca and Medina. And that's another exceptional aspect of this narrative, because we, well, usually don't have the kinds of voices, not only a female voice, but we usually don't have voices of people, men, which are the majority of the voices in this early modern period, the 16th and 17th century, who write about the kind of experience, really the ecstatic experience, as they come to circumambulate the Kaaba. So as a social historian, I'm also interested in emotions, a very difficult thing to get at when you work on the past, because of multiple reasons, because emotions are always, of course, historically constructed. And then when we actually get them through poetry, you have to read it through certain kinds of poetics and rhetorics and wonder whether it is a modeling of these rhetorics that come into the voice that you're hearing. So these are some of the critical lenses that I come to use in order to understand this Masnavi of a widow from Isfahan. There you go. So to begin with, let me give you a little bit of a sense of the setting, right? Like any other object from the past, we need to really place it within its historical context in order to understand what it is saying. Professor Watawet has written poetry about immigrants and refugees. And if we don't know the larger context of the politics and the economy of refugees today, we really won't understand what it is that he's referring to. So in the same way, this poetry from the middle of the 17th century needs to be contextualized. And I'm going to give you first a larger picture, the macro picture, and then zoom into Isfahan itself. And here you have a map of the Safavid Empire. More or less, you know, these are the contentious parts. So modern day Asia Minor in Turkey, but at this time it was the Ottoman Empire. Diyarbakir, of course, is a region that you all probably heard about because of the Kurds, the majority of the Kurds actually living here. But at this time, this is the boundary that is shaped and contested by the Ottomans who, let's say, take over Baghdad. These are lands, these larger yellow, darker yellow lands are what comes to be associated and remains with the Safavids, who rule for 200 years. They begin, interestingly enough, here in Ardabil as a Sufi order, a mystic order, right? And how does a mystic order turn to be an empire? Well, all the myth that you hear that Sufis and mystics are very passive and peaceful, you have to put into context, because actually in this period of time, when you have a disillusionment of like a center of authority from Baghdad where the Abbasid Caliph ruled and patronized Sunni Islam. I assume you know the differences between Sunni and Shia. If I'm saying something and you don't understand, I'm very interactive. You should stop me. If you need clarification, you should ask me. So with the dissipation of the Abbasids, you don't have really a central authority or several central authoritarian figures or capital cities. And so what happens is that you have local power that emerges to be significant as far as not only religiosity, but also economy. So Sufi orders establish themselves throughout this region of the Iranian plateau, but also in Asia Minor, and here in India as well, and in Central Asia too. And what they do is they actually usually, the Sufi order sheikh dies and you build a tomb around it. It becomes a sacred space where people continue to come to pay respect and pilgrimage. And especially in chaotic times, they endow their land to the shrine itself because it's protected. Endowments are protected from other conquests that come in, and gradually Sheikh Safi, and that's how you know you have the empire's name, Safavid, pure. But Sheikh Safi dies. His son and his followers build him a shrine here, and it gradually grows, and gradually his followers are all over the Caspian Sea region and come and as gifts to receive the kind of benefit that a sacred sheikh can actually award you. They come to be members, active members, but also the economic backbone of this order, which comes to grow. And in the 1500s, one of the descendants of Sheikh Safi, Ismail, comes and takes over, conquers with his devotees who are Sufis. They have a particular red hat. You can always tell them in miniature. They're called Rizil-Bosch. Rizil in Turkish is just red. Bosch is head. And they're devotees who actually are ready to go into the battlefield and risk their lives for their sheikh, who becomes Shah of the Safavid world. So I'm going to take you 100 years forward when Ismail, the descendant of Urdubadi, comes in and takes over first Tabriz and then Ghazvin, and then his descendants move to, where's Isfahan? Right here, Isfahan, in around 1590, so around 100 years after the establishment. What the Safavids are known for, or what Sheikh Shah Ismail is known for, is that he establishes Shiism, Imami Shiism, 12er Shiism in Iran. That's why today the majority of Iranians, 99% of Iranians, are Shia, versus those who are living in the Ottoman Empire who are Sunni. There's a real relationship between the Shia here, which I shouldn't really get into, and Lebanese Shia, because in this period of time when the Safavid Shah Ismail comes and establishes himself, there are no Shi'i theologians. So there's a need for immigrants from Jabal Amel, contemporary Lebanon, Syria, to come and immigrate, and they kind of mix in with the local Persian speakers to become then the theological, the juridical backbone of this empire. Any questions here? All clear? Okay, so it's within this geography that we're going to move into this new capital city, which was not very new in the beginning, right? It's a pre-Islamic city, Isfahan, and the subsequent Turkic peoples, the Seljuks and the Mongols, come in and establish. Unfortunately, this little thing is taking over, but the older city is up here. And what this new king Shah Abbas does, thank you, for the new capital city is to, oh, perfect. So in the back here, there's actually, you don't see very clearly. So this is more the southern side of the city itself. You have the medieval mosque that was established by the Seljuks and then the Mongols. And you have a medieval city, you have the bazaar as well. What the Shah does when he establishes Isfahan as his capital city, moving from Tabriz and Ghazvin, is that he has monumental renovation of the city itself to counter in some way the old city. This is the bazaar, where all of the labyrinth of the bazaar itself opens up into the medieval city, but then actually takes the passage of people from the medieval city through the bazaar to this open space, which is referred to as Meydan Nakhsh Jahan, or the image of the world. And you have to imagine the size. It's something like 500 feet by 1,800 feet. It's huge, right? I don't know if any of you know Venice, the Piazza San Marco. This is 7 times the size of the Piazza San Marco. There's an attempt to have that kind of an effect, right? As a new capital city. And of course, here there's a palace. Here's a small mosque that was built for one of these Jabal Omeli Alems, and here is the first Friday prayer mosque that the Safavids built. Why didn't they build a mosque before? Because of theological reasons. Because according to 12th Shia theology, they have to wait until the Mahdi comes back, who's in occultation, right? Before they can actually pray in a congregational prayer behind the Mahdi. So some clerics had to actually figure out theologically Hilla Sharia, right? To be able to legitimize the fact that they could build this magnificent Friday prayer mosque, Masjid Jame, today is referred to as Masjid Imam because of Imam Khomeini, but it also tells you something about a centrality of power, which is a feature of the early modern world. You see it in Istanbul, you see it in Agra, you see it in Venice, right? Where there you have a palace, you have the king, the Shah, and the religious authorities and commerce really working intimately together to be able to have some kind of a hold on to power. So this is just for you to see really the magnificence of this Masjid Shah with the epigraphy. And here you have Allah, and you actually have here Ali. His name is inscribed. This gateway is referred to as the Bab Ali, as the gate of Ali. And there's a famous hadith that says that knowledge really belongs to, again, through and with the gate of Ali himself. And you get a sense of size, right? And you get a sense of, you know, what turquoise, and I'm just coming back from Samarkand. And when you see a city where all around you, you have this turquoise, huge buildings, it is very impressive. And you get a sense that it is like half the world, that you're living in some other kind of a celestial world. And these whitewashed areas today were also all painted all along, and descriptions of chroniclers say that they were painted with depictions of paradise from the Quran, where you have huris and ghilmans, female servers and male servers represented there. Just again to give you a sense of this view from the mosque itself, and going towards the bazaar on the southern side. And here we have, okay, we don't have photographs from this period of time, but you know, paintings help. There is this architecture that remains. And so that also gives us a sense, but we always have to be careful, right? Because how we experience that space may not always have been the way people from the past in the 17th century did. But here you have I believe he's the Dutch traveler who sketches this Maidan, where you get a good sense of how crowded it was. There are all these different things going on here. I mean, here you have a storyteller, and people are around him, and we know that there were storytellers because we have some Persian sources that tell us about it. But then, you know, commerce also, it's kind of makeshift tents of commerce are here. People were playing polo. It's a bustling public space. And I think the success, of course, doesn't always, like a success of an architect, a monumental architectural project doesn't always work out. And this is very clear that it had that kind of, the design, actually, the power of the design was very effective to create this public space then and even now. Demonstrations today in Iran and Isfahan, everybody comes in and takes over space. So how do I and us as historians study the past when, as I said, you don't have photographs necessarily, or especially when I'm interested in the way, as a social and cultural history, the way people think, the way people act, the way their values and their behaviors. We have to look at our historical sources. And there is your theme for this colloquium on hiddenness and lost stories, right? Really have to be understood for the past in particular, but I think the present as well. We're living through a time where the present, what is historical fact, is also being questioned. What are our archives and what are our sources? And of course, the main archives that people have to study the past, like the Ottomans, are imperial archives, right? The Safavids don't last to the modern period. There's an invasion of the Afghans in 1722. They claim that they got rid of all of their archive. I don't really believe in that all, but anyway, the Ottomans have archives because they last till the modern period, right? And so Ottoman historians don't have the same kind of issues that, let's say, Safavid historians would have to study. But generally, an imperial or a state or a national archive, here you see the national archives in Washington, D.C., as you see, they're organized. They choose what to put in the archive, right? They are classified and they're categorized, and hence knowledge of the past is already, you can imagine, some hidden, some done away with, some interpreted, right, in a way in which the state wants to show itself, wants to be remembered as well. So one has to be very careful when one enters into these state or national or imperial colonial archives. And there's a good example from the medieval Egypt, Fatimid Egypt, where here you see, it's fascinating that, maybe we actually look in the wrong places to see these kinds of traces of the past. This archive is called the Cairo Geniza because it was found behind a wall in a medieval synagogue in Cairo itself. And what did it preserve? It could have been trash. It could have been considered as trash, but it was sacred trash because the name of God was written on it, and you could not throw these papers, these archives away. But what it is that there's also, paper is expensive. Paper is rare, and you just, you write all over the paper. It's not like we do nowadays, like you write a note and then, you throw it out. These were, and there's one historian in Princeton, Marina Rostov, who's doing fantastic work on this Geniza. So these are from the Egyptian Fatimid Chancery. They are bureaucratic documents, right? Which were then recycled. And you have the Jewish population of Cairo. Some of them are traders. So we know a lot about the Indian Ocean trade in this period of time through these Geniza archives, who then use, the rest of whatever is remaining. This is probably a back that hasn't been used, or I think she has an idea about why the whole is here. But as you see, it's bilingual. It's from different periods of time. But for this historian, for instance, it gives her a way of studying what were the bureaucratic traditions at the court. And some are interested in just the social history that you can get from these Jewish merchants who are working in the Mediterranean and in the Indian Ocean. So these are accidental archives, right? They're not archives that were actually planned to be. So there's another way in which you have to read them. What they preserve is not intentionally what is to be preserved, right? But the archives that I'm using and that I'm going to get to, which are these family archives, are these majmuas and muraqas. Majmua is from the Arabic jama'a. Majmu is what is gathered together. I call them anthologies because I think anthologies give us a resonance in the English language of collections of poetry mostly, but collections. And raka from Arabic again, patchworks. What gets patched together in terms of these paintings that later on they are patched together into albums. They're loose sheets whereby people ordered, right? They were patrons of paintings. And that tells you something about, going back to the power that I was trying to tell you about commerce, politics, religion, that this becomes a really important center, entrepot Isfahan, of silk traders. You have Armenians who are forced into migration into Isfahan itself. They were silk merchants. They are the family kind of companies that export and import silk really throughout the world. You have Tabrizi from Azerbaijan, merchants who are also basically forced migration because they had control over the bazaar under the Mongols in Tabriz itself. So you have a very important merchant class also that's represented in Isfahan. It's a rich capital city. In order to have status, you actually commission paintings, right? That's something that you had painters before, but to have the economic capital and ability to engage in that, that's something that we see in this period of time. But also what's interesting, and I think it's an early modern phenomena as well, because you have these kinds of anthologies emerging also in Germany or in German city-states, in France and in England, commonplace books, for instance, where people come to record their own histories, come to bring their accountancies of a household together. And in these particular cases, this is where I found the poetry, the Masnavi of this widow from a household of bureaucrats, the Urdubadi bureaucrats, where her poetry is recorded. But there's all different sorts of things. You have, letters that are recorded, and you see again, there is absolutely no rhyme or reason as far as how are you supposed to divide the page. Information is just collected in the page, right? And of course, most of the paper is used on the surface of the page in order to record. Sometimes you find wills, sometimes you find poetry about the death of a mother and a date that goes with it. You have a lot of personal, which is a way to enter into the intimacy, let's say, of a household. The majority of these majmua, of these anthologies, are anonymous. We have a few like this one. That's why it was easier to work with, because in the preface, the name of the family is indicated, and it was a bureaucratic family, which gives us some kind of idea about the exceptionality of this widow, in that she's able to read and write. She probably learns in her household. Girls did not go to school outside of the household really until the 20th century in most of the Middle East, right? They learned at home. And her family were a literate family. They were both poets and writing letters, diplomatic letters at court. So with her example, I can extrapolate, as I say, what is an exception and a norm, that even though these majmuas were probably compiled by men, and male authored in the sense, right? Because as a male member of the family, we can tell from their profession. It's a bureaucrat who brings all these together, uses the space of the anthology to collect his and his father's and grandfather's letters that he had written for the court or a religious cleric, but that women in the household also had access to these majmuas and were part of, let's say, this family literacy that was, I think, exceptional in the Urdubadi family, but maybe perhaps not in many other households. And we have thousands of these majmuas. Nobody's really looked at them carefully. I've just begun to, and I'm working with a colleague of mine in Isfahan to collect them and to place them digitally so that everybody around the world can really use them, because they're all in Iran. They're mostly in Tehran, in libraries in Tehran itself. And so likewise, you have a lot of these painters, and he's one of them who I worked on, Muhammad Qasem, who is commissioned different kinds of paintings and writes oftentimes here, he paints it for a friend of his. On a Friday, it's Ramadan, they're waiting for the fast for them to break the fast. And he then records and paints a young male figure in the household of a certain Shafi. Okay, so to move on and give you a little bit now from this macro context, to give you a sense of sociability. How does one understand the ways in which people interacted with one another? What does a social historian do? I mean, the very core of a society is just family, right? How families are constructed, husband and wife. I mean, that's one way in which state or religion has control of its population, ensures that marriage is recorded in the state or marriage is recorded religiously, right? But when you look at friendship, and friendship becomes a very important aspect of sociability too, and mysticism as well, one certificate that one finds, that I have found in these majmuas, are certificates of vows of friendship formed between men and between women. Sireye, the term sireye itself is like a document, or a legal document. Khahar khondegi, in Persian, sisterhood, va barodar khondegi, brother, right? And I think these practices come out of Sufi culture, right? So when one thinks about how does Sufism or mysticism affect people's day-to-day lives, one has to think about the ways in which certain practices, and in Sufis we know in modern day Turkey, for instance, how certain Sufi orders continue to have marriages, not between the same sex, but between the opposite sex. Something has changed there in the modern period. But these vows of friendship or sisterhood and brotherhood are ways in which the biological family is extended. Why? Because you really need, in these kinds of societies, we need them now too, we need friends, is that it actually strengthens your network, right? And it creates the kind of loyalty and devotion beyond bloodlines. And oftentimes bloodlines, there's a lot of tension for inheritance. And with sisterhoods and brotherhoods, that very much does away with a kind of monetary tension that you see operating in society and in families. Now, I want to also talk to you a little bit about Islamic law and about this culture. What is Sufism, and how does Sufism come to affect people's daily lives? Sufism is a very difficult concept and practice to describe. It's sort of like trying to tell a deaf person what music is like, because it's so much about emotions and it's so much about experience. And that's why poetry was the main medium through which Sufis expressed and wrote about their experiences. And here, one of the practices of Sufism, which I think is very central to thinking about kinds of emotional desires that are operative between men and between women, is the practice of gazing. And the practice of gazing is one where here, as you see very clearly, right, there's an older man, he's leaning on his stick. It's one painting by this guy Urdubadi, a very popular painter of this beginning of the 17th century, and a young, beautiful youth who is looking away very coyly, with a very, provocative jug of wine in his hands. And probably what he is he's a saqi, he's a wine bearer, right? And a cup bearer. And I'm thinking this is like a notebook that they would actually account on how much wine they would give to so and so, right? So you couldn't just give wine away, right? I mean, somebody had to either pay for it or yeah, there was some kind of accountability for it. Huh? Kick it, exactly, literally, yeah. But what's interesting is the way in which later on these two separate paintings have been put together to describe, right there. Here, this is a later writing. Your green line, that is an oye, that is a sign of beauty. So what is the green line? The green line is the first stubble of beard, mustache, beard, that grows on a youth, right? Which is considered to be really, as far as the poetics of beauty is concerned, as the liminal stage when a young male becomes a man, right? And that liminal stage is written in a lot of poetry, right? It definitely becomes, that is the object of beauty for the male youth. But in Sufism, let's say, the theoretical practice is this male youth is only an intermediary for God, because God has created beauty and the male youth epitomizes that beauty. And what you're supposed to do is it's like a spiritual exercise, gaze, desire, and resist. That's how desire works. You go to a lot of these websites of the religious right, you constantly have pornography that appears as ads. Why? Because in order to know what is prohibited, you actually need to know what it's like, right? To resist. And so it's this interesting tension that works, I think, together, that you really see here, that resistance, and you see it very clearly in the way in which a later artist has put together these two pieces of pages of poetry together, and then has given us a sense of how you're supposed to read it, right? And that's, I think, a really interesting way in which you see so much of the paintings that emerge in this period of time in this light. It's like, just in case, that's why usually if you have a painting, you don't have a writing around it, right? Or a date around it. So there's kind of a historicity, but the writing around it tells you, okay, this is how you're supposed to actually read the poetry itself. So my point here is for you to see how Sufism and practices of Sufism come to shape the ways in which people experience beauty and desire, right? I mean, this is the pervasiveness of Sufism, I think, really comes to create a certain kind of what, in big words is phenomenology, but basically a way in which you come to see and experience others, right? And so that is, of course, your everyday experiences that are shaped and forged. And of course, you have agency, not to say that you don't, in that. But again, just to show you how common this phenomena of male homoeroticism, right? It's not homosexuality, because first of all, that term didn't even exist. That term is a very modern term. Homosexuality is a way in which people legally, as a species, existed. But this desire, a homosocial desire, and why homosocial in the sense that it's a society where men hung out together the whole time and women hung out together. And it's not only in the Islamic world. In Europe too, that segregation was a very common phenomenon. It's not until the modern period where you have a heterosexual public space like the street. So catcalling is very much that trace of a street that was owned by men, right? And that there's still a sense that women really should not enter into it. So here, again, very clearly, in writing and poetry. You have the name of the poet and the painter, Muhammad Qasim here, Raqam Kamine Muhammad Qasim Musaffar. And you have the king, the one who actually builds Isfahan as a new capital city with his beloved. And the lines of poetry also speak about the multiple lips of the river, the lip of the beloved, and the lip of the cup itself of wine. Again, very, I would say, positioned strategically as far as the bottle of wine itself. There was no sense of humiliation. I have to tell you that we're going to look a little bit in Islamic law, but in Islam, contrary to Christianity, male desire was not considered against nature. Contra natura, that's a very Christian thing. It comes in the Bible. You have legal scholars who even will accept and say how let's say common. I don't want to use the word natural because natural has problematic terms to it. But I see that we're running out of time. I just want to give you a sense of how much,
all the time you need.
How much male beauty, male youth beauty is depicted in these paintings, right? And a lot of them are cupbearers, and a lot of poetry or biographies of poets from the period of time. We have stories of love stories between poets and the coffee house servers, and even the king. We have a story about him, the one I showed you, who loved you at a particular coffee house, would go there and really fell in love with this male youth. So the language of love, which is also a language of Sufism, love for God, right? What happens in this period of time, and we call it in Persian, Maktab-e-Ruhi, the realistic school of poetry, that love falls from a divine love to an earthly love. And it's a phenomenon that's happening in the Ottoman Empire too. People have written literary scholars about that as well. And I talk about poetry also, I should just tell you, is that poetry was a language of communication. We've lost that now, but people didn't, it's not prose that they wrote to one another. That's a new phenomena even there when you're writing letters. But poetry, you communicated through poetry. And whether you knew how to write it or not, you still could versify, you could come and compose poetry itself. So poetry is central as far as that archive of emotions, central to trying to understand human relations. And here, just to give you a sense of, again, this prolongation of the city square to tree-lined boulevards, Chahar Bagh, four cornered gardens, whereby you had coffee houses along the path of the Chahar Bagh itself. And so, pleasure, and one has to think about time that people had to engage in pleasure. That was also a very, I think, an early modern phenomena. It's usually associated with modernity, but already here, the earliness of that modern it indicates the fact that you have some of these practices that emerge really before what we have considered as modernity. So I talked a little bit about this pledge of sisterhood and brotherhood, but just wanted to tell you a little bit, and here you see again, these are very clearly two men of the same age, of the same rank, which is important, entering into these sworn friendships. And the handshake is something very typical as depicted. And so one is a right hand, one is a left hand. You can tell professions oftentimes by hats are very telling. The amame, the turban, is telling of the profession. But here you have a pen, so probably either a calligrapher or a painter, and here you have a sword. So somebody who was part of the military, but entering into these friendships. Now, what does the law say? The law, as I mentioned, doesn't consider male same-sex desire as illegal or against nature. What matters, of course, is penetration and anal sex. So intracural sex, the law says, is not liwat, and liwat goes back to Lot in the Bible. I mean, the Bible. He's in the Bible too, but in the Quran, and the people of Lot are considered to be people who went towards men in lieu of women. For women, women don't really matter that much. I mean, really, it's the law mentions them, but again, because it's what is in public. Law is made to control what is in public, right? And what is in public are men in public, right? And so musahaka, which means just rubbing, very similar to the Latin word tribad, is really not a sin because there is no penetration. And what's interesting is that it is considered under ta'zir, and ta'zir is discretionary punishment. In other words, that again, so long as there's a symmetry or asymmetry, right? So if it's an older man and a younger man, if it's a rich man and let's say a servant, if there is that age asymmetry, if there is that class asymmetry, and if you're paying for it, that's totally fine. But the problem is, at least according to law, is that if you're like these two men we saw, if you are of the same more or less social background and on the same age, then that becomes a penalty by execution. But there's really no indication. We have no legal, of course, we don't have those legal court records, but even in the Ottoman case where they have legal court records, it's very rare. In Europe too, it's a very rare thing in the 14th and 15th century if you actually have these kinds of court cases force what they call sodomy, right? Because penetration is what is central for it, right? And in the Safavid case, I have rarely seen it's usually political if it happens. It's to get at somebody at court and to accuse them. So what about women? I see I have 10 minutes left and I want to make sure that we talk about this widow. They're, of course, more rare in the records, as I said, because they're less out there in the public. We have less of their writings. And it's interesting for us to think about why is that the case. I mean, it's obvious, but maybe, yeah, it's interesting that it varies from one culture to the other. We have in Mughal India more women poets who are very much present in the Taskiras, in the biography of poets, than we have, let's say, with women. And this is just a text of one of these vows of exchange between one friend and the other, the female version of it, the Khohar Khandegi, where it's very clear, it's legitimate, it's legal. You actually vow in front of God. We have records of how they officiated, usually at the birthday of Imam Ali, in particular kinds of spaces, sacred spaces in Isfahan itself, but it's a serious act of loyalty and devotion to your sister. In this anthology that was collected by these bureaucrats, these Urdubadis, I found this Masnavi, which is around 1,200 verses. Masnavi is just a mystical story that is told, versified, like Layli and Majnun, like Nizami's Layli and Majnun, as a common form of it itself. And here what you have interesting is that the scribe in red introduces her, right? And introduces her. He's a family scribe, so you get a sense of a little bit about the practice. On this side, you see a ghazal that was written by a male member of the family, really juxtaposed along the same, on the other side of the page, this widow. And here, the scribe in red introduces her as the pure, chaste, and honorable one, the Queen of Sheba, the Khadija of our age, the beautiful, lawful one, the graceful widow of Mirza Khalid. And I think I mentioned, maybe in my little abstract, usually Muslim women's names are not mentioned for honors, in order to protect the honor of themselves and of the family as well. And in this case, it's the Zawje, the wife of Mirza Khalid, who was a very important chancery Raqam Nevis. He wrote documents in the court of two of the Safavid Shahs. Now, the reference to the Queen of Sheba and the reference to Khadija is pretty obvious. Khadija was the widow, rich widow of the Prophet, right? Very independent woman. So that gives you a sense of how the scribe is understanding this widow. And the Queen of Sheba, of course, was this powerful woman who eventually succumbs to Solomon, but is also, again, independently wealthy, and a figure that one has to take seriously, right? So just her voice a little bit, and I want to read it for you. Here you have the English, but just to give a sense of, I know some of you read Persian and understand it, but just to get a sense of the poetry. Is beautiful, it's simple. She's taking on the poetic language that, at least from what we've known till now, has been a male-dominated language, and she makes it her own. And we'll see how she makes it all here, I think. مرا چون کرد چرخ حیله پرداز جگرخون از فراق یار دمساز حرامم شد به بستر خواب راحت ندیدم چاره ای غیر از سیاحت نه شب خواب و نه روزم بود آرام که تا بستم به طوف کعبه احرام کمر بربستم و بازو گشادم بدان سو پای همت را نهادم I tied myself around the holy Kaaba. I vowed to circumambulate the holy Kaaba. I saw no solution other than travel. I washed my heart from the fear of danger. I wrote the divination of my trip as auspicious. I mean, that's a very strong voice. A woman who has a strong will. Her husband has just died. We hear as she leaves Isfahan and visits the tomb of her husband. She's scared, she says, because the trip is not an easy trip. It's not like it is now, where you have air conditioning in Mecca, and you have transportation. She goes probably alone. She complains that none of her family members came and accompanied her. That may be part of the trope of the poetry itself. Is the shakwa poetry, where you complain against the friends, family who don't quite do what you want them to do. But in any case, she probably goes with her slave. She goes with a camel litter, searched all the way, I'll show you, to the Ottoman Empire, where there's an official of the Hajj who actually leads them to Mecca and Medina. I think that what would be usually the case, we have more of these cases from the Mughal court, is that, of course, once in your lifetime, at the end of your life, or towards the end of her life, is where you actually take this pilgrimage to Mecca. And so she decides that she wants to do it, and she does. And so the travel continues, and here on the side in the margin, somebody has written, which is interesting, somebody has read it later on, and has said, seen khuruj shodan az Iran. That here is where she leaves the land of Iran, which she, again, we don't have this kind of voice that says, what do they call the territory that was a Safavid territory? Mamlekat mahbused, well protected land. And there too, when she leaves, she's like, oh my God, we're so afraid. The shadow of the Shah is no longer here. We become like mouse in front of the lions that are the Ottomans. But she's very discerning in the sense that here's her trajectory from Isfahan. She goes to Tabriz, and normally either they would go through Basra, and she tells us, don't go through Basra because it's very dangerous to go through Basra, and it's a hard trip. But she goes to Tabriz, and then she decides to go and see her friend in Urdubad, which is her family's native land, right? She calls it Urdubadam, using the first person possessive, my Urdubad, although she considers herself an Isfahani, and then joins the Hajj pilgrimage of the Ottomans, and loves Aleppo. She's like, Aleppo is her favorite city here, and goes down to Mecca and then Medina, and we don't know what happens to her afterward. But what's interesting, and I, again, we'll just spend 5 minutes and I want to open up to questions, is that she refers to her female companion as Yor and Rafiq, her husband, and God with the same terms, right? Which again, the echo of Sufism should be present in the way in which she's imagining these different emotional relationship with her three loved ones, right? And just to get a sense a little bit of her writing itself, she says, together in Isfahan, when she decides to go to see her female friend, we had been companions, yar. In spirit, we ate each other's sorrow. And I translated, we have a great translator here, but I translated it for translations about choices, right? Persian has this idiom, gham khorda, right? You literally eat the sorrow. And I wanted to keep it that way, so that people it would sound odd, but really also to think about some of the resonance which the original tongue had. She was a relative better than any sister, kinder than any of my other relatives. But suddenly, heaven's playful tricks, charche hile pardoz, appeared on the stage of deceit. So much so that it, heaven, hid that kind one from my gaze, as a body is separated from its soul. So let me pause and say, what do you make out of that? What do you make out of this language? Given a little bit of this context of Sufism, but how does it strike you emotionally?
She's talking to the universe.
She is.
She's talking to everything.
Yes, she's definitely,
including the love.
Yeah.
So
that's a really good point. That
she takes this frontal view of
yeah, she's imagining an audience, right? I mean, as she's writing, and even though it appears just in her family anthology, she's already imagining an audience. As you're saying, she speaks to us, whoever the audience is. She's speaking to her lover. There's a lot of first and third person references in her poetry as well, definitely. But how is she speaking to us? How is she actually evoking? Yes,
the eating of the sorrow, is that like we sort of we somehow reduce the sorrow for each other?
Yeah, because we bear it together, right? And in fact, the kind of loyalty it is as a friend who's listening to it is that you share that sorrow, and to the degree in which you actually come to eat it and to digest it.
So it's not like the pleasure of eating, it's like we somehow nod at it or something to that effect that we...
Yeah. No, I don't. But, I think what you're saying is also makes sense from the way in which I understand how desire and restraint work, right? They're very much part of the same dynamic, right? What gives you the desire and the palate for eating is a knowledge that is tasty, right? But it's also then that it comes to eliminate in some way or bear pain as well. So pain and pleasure, I think, are very much two very dynamic or dialogic emotions.
Yeah.
Don't be shy. Patio, what do you say?
Just really looking at the last two lines here, where like I think my understanding is that the body is like one of the friends and the soul is the other one.
Yes.
It's talking about how they were separated by the heaven,
Right.
and heaven kind of hid one of them.
Yeah. And that's actually a very old, it's Platonic, Plato's Symposium. That's all we actually, a lot of us love. It's how that language has traveled, right? So there's one of the dialogues, I think it's Socrates and Dionysius, is that from the time that we're born, we're separated from the divine, who's really our soul. And we struggle from the time that we were born to bring the two together. And so friendship oftentimes is understood in this Platonic circle as two bodies or two souls that match each other. They're like, and so that what was originally separate comes together because you recognize in your friend that beauty that is really part of your own soul itself. So that's a really great comment. You want to, what's your name?
I sort of am interested in the Heaven's Playful Tricks appeared on the stage of deceit aspect, because it sort of strikes me as her resistance coming to that desire, like coming right at the moment where it would become sin, and like in some ways not understanding why she resisted it necessarily and or entirely.
So that's a good way of reading it, but I would suggest that so suddenly Heaven's Playful Tricks, and one has to read more of her poems to see how she's enacting that. Fortune there's something there that even though there's, she is a practicing Muslim and she knows that God decides, but there's something that comes qismat, right? All of a sudden, and there's a real belief in the play of fortune as it comes and suddenly appears and changes the course of her life, right? So for sure that she doesn't have that control over it is very much the case, but I think the way charkh hile pardoz, charkh is really about this daur, right? It's something that turns. It's really about the turn of fortune, right? But that's something that again doesn't come out in translation as easily, but it's a very good point. But what appeared on the stage of deceit? So what do you make of that, such that it hid that kind one from my gaze?
Stage is not a dramatic term, right? It's like a stage in, is it a stage as in the time, or like there's a stage in your life, etc., etc., etc.?
Oh no, I think it's the floor, the ground of, right? Let me see why I give. If I can find it, what is this? I think maqam, probably. But yeah, so no, not in the same, not in the sense of stage of temporal stage, right? But the stage of the floor of, right?
The place.
The place.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
But so are Heaven's Playful Tricks not supposed to go to that place, or that's where they go?
I mean, so it's open to interpretation, right? Yes, please.
So for the Heaven's Playful Tricks, if you're saying that it's fortune that is playing the tricks on her, then could the stage of deceit, I guess, be her life? It seems kind of generic or vague, but it seems as though the stage of deceit to which the fortune tricks would play a role is her life and her friendship.
Exactly. I mean, that's how I interpret it. Of course, one always has to allow for ambiguity, right? Again, those are the kinds of places where she doesn't say directly, rumors, or does she maybe? It's something that happens in Isfahan, that fortune comes in and plays its evil tricks, deceitful tricks, so that they're forced to separate one another, right? And so that's exactly how I read it, but I didn't want to, I wanted to allow for the ambiguity to still remain in the poem, because I think that's what she does. And I think when we think about what's hidden, the scribe who writes this has no problem writing and recording this, right? Why? Because maybe friendship precisely is the ambiguity around, right? These kinds of emotions, to have multiple kinds of affective, emotional spaces in it, so that body and soul gives you a sense that maybe it's not necessarily a physical, a carnal. And I think that carnal and spiritual aspects in Sufism is something very much that she plays on. And I think that ambiguity, as I have written in the article about it, I don't want to call it this or the other, because I think that, some people have told me, why didn't you call it a lesbian relationship? I don't think it's a lesbian relationship. Not only because it's not, it's ahistorical to call it that, but because I think we're too stuck on sex today, that actually these kinds of, that's why I use intimacy, right, is something that you can be really intimate with a same-sex friend, but you don't necessarily have to have that physical. So just to allow it to be, open to different kinds of interpretations. But she does talk about two bodies for sure. And she does talk about, torturous separation, which is very much the language, again, that mystics use, male mystics use, about their relationship to God, right? That she appropriates, but I think, again, how does she make it her own? She talks about her own emotions towards her friend. All along in the travels, she meets other people. She personalizes those relationships. There's something where she breaks from that male discourse on spirituality. And then, of course, the way in which she refers to love is a sickness. And that's, again, it goes back to this period of time, really the medieval period of time, where somebody like Ibn Sina refers to, Avicenna refers to love as a sickness, right? And you need to be cured, and you need to find a remedy for it. And for her, there was no remedy unless she had to be sabr, patient, until one day she's able to finally unite. Again, she takes destiny in her own hand. She decides in Tabriz. It's not part of her path of travel to go and see her friend. But once she goes to see her friend, she's not able to actually, again, really be intimate with her because she's sick. Or she represents herself as being sick itself. And so she says, not for a moment was I able to be her partner in conversation. I did not become intimate. And, again, sohbat in Persian and Arabic has both the connotation or register of discourse, intercourse, right? And an association that it could be just conversational, and it could also be more than that. And so here I decide not to make it very explicit again. And the part where she goes to the Kaaba is incredible. She faints, and she talks about here her crimes and sins, which could be many other crimes and sins, right? Because you go and you circumambulate 7 times in order to wash yourself of all these transgressions, but one can still always read the possibility of how she's considering her sins as being also part of this emotion that she felt towards her friend, that people had rumors in Isfahan that forced them to actually separate from one another. And there, after she talks about the 7th turn of her guilt, and I repaired my ruined heart, I sought the road of forgiveness and washed away my filthy crime. And that's where she loses consciousness. And what is very strange, again ambiguous, is that there's no end to her poem. The scribe leaves space, right? As though, is she going to, you can speculate, is she going to come back and bring the rest of her purse is there. That can't be. She's already, whatever the case is, whatever she had was already there with the scribe. How do you finish the story? Does she die on her way back? We will never know. But one thing that
she ends it at that.
She's coming out of Mecca and Medina. She goes towards Aleppo. So she's heading towards Aleppo, and here she says, "How pleasant was the Kaaba, how worthy was the going, and how empty is the return." It's her favorite poet, Nizami, that she quotes from as her last her last words. So we have to also think about, was she writing as, and some of the verbs she uses is that either she's reciting and her slave is writing it, or she's writing it herself. So one gets a sense that she's writing it in the process of the pilgrimage and the travels as well. But but we don't know. Whatever the case is, I think as I have read her, I think there were many more of these women who wrote. They don't always survive. I mean, one has to think about what is lost. Why is this, her poem, her Masnavi, in our hands today? It's because she wrote it in a family that actually recorded letters and poetry, right? And so there was a very conscious attempt to record what she had written, right? It's very possible that other women would have written, and yet they were not. We've lost a lot of things that men have written as well, right? So one has to also imagine this possibility of many other women writers and poets writing not as famous poets who we recognize, like Rabia, for instance, but that also, you know, there's thousands of these majmua out there. We haven't read them all, for sure. It's still for the future generations really to look at them and to find them and to discover these very intimate. And, you know, going back to the colloquium topic, hidden, again, to think about what friendships allowed, especially friendships with women. But this society of Isfahan allowed for male intimacies totally as well. It was much more the norm in elite circles. But how friendship also, first of all, was very different than friendship is today. So friendship has a history. It's constructed at different moments in time differently. And how, of course, we are living through a moment in time where, because of these kinds of associations, these carnal associations and intimate associations between two male friends and two female friends, that we're living through a moment of time where those possibilities are actually so much more demarcated between friendships. So I'll end here and ask you really for your questions, your responses, any ambiguity, probably also on Zoom. There must be some questions, no? No, okay. Do you have any, are you curious about anything I've talked about? I know, Saf was always curious.
I can't wait if there's some. I don't know what to say.
Well, maybe you could, you know, open up and see.
What I was thinking is that while you were having a question about the eating sadness, Shakespeare has "I eat the air," Hamlet. I eat the air, promised correct, when he's trying to explain what his future, whatnot. And also Shakespeare also says life is but a stage. So that stage that you mentioned there could actually be a stage of life.
No, I think that stage was definitely a makan, right? It was more of a place, right? I'll find it.
Also, Babayan, you write for a cause. Did she wrote this in order to express the companion, or she used this travel log going to Mecca as a cover for expressing reflecting on the relationship.
No, I don't
Which
think
one?
I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think she used it as a cover. I think we have to think about it, this period of time where those kinds of friendship were common. But with her friend, there was a separation because probably there were rumors, at least with the two of us. What's your name?
Abi.
Read it similarly. But I think that, first of all, we tend to actually give too much, we want to find a cause for why people record things, right? Don't you just write sometimes because you like to write? I mean, there's something about writing about your pilgrimage if you have a good pen, right? So there's something about the kind of talent that she had that she wanted to, of course, use and describe. But I think it's interesting that the scribe just writes what he writes. He's not interested at all in the part of the friendship to Urdubadi. He says this is a woman who writes her travel narrative and goes through the different stages, right, of her travel, the different cities that she travels as she travels to Urdubadi, which was a genre, right? People wrote about travel literature was a genre. People wrote about, the geographies of the places that they had traveled to. So for him, that seemed to be much more how he categorized. I don't think he was hiding anything.
No.
I think it didn't strike him,
You know that Jalal al-Ahmad wrote the Hasid al-Miqat.
Yes.
And by writing Hasid al-Miqat, he reflects on his trip from.
Yes, yeah.
And in that thing, if you read it, you just go and imagine some things that happened to him.
Yeah.
So my point, when you talk about this, I thought that maybe this person wrote this travel log and he thought that it would be a good, not cover, but like a bastari باشه. It's a kind of frame for.
So I think that
because definitely that person had a great impression on her.
Definitely.
That eating the sorrow to me is look like that feeling sympathetic toward the others. It means that feeling the pain of the others.
Yes.
And definitely is more than a friend. Is it like just?
Well, she says it's more better than any sister that I had, right? So that kind of closeness is definitely something that she talks about. But I guess what I would say as a practice or a method, I don't try to read intention as much. I look at the effect that it's had. I think that the effect that it has had then on those who come to read it afterwards definitely could have different definitely. That's why I thought it was also so important. But there's no doubt that she's pious. And what's interesting is when we think that somebody is pious in the past, we think, that this is how they have to be and very much enclosed. But she flirts with men that she goes to see. She says, oh, what a good looking man this guy was. There is a first of all, she travels. The sense that we have of early modern women is that they don't. Of course, she has the means. There's no doubt that she had the money. This was an expensive journey that she had to take. But piety, I have to say, and I think part of writing this, when you read her around the Kaaba as well, I mean, she is definitely so emotional that, of course, part of that writing has to do with the affective emotional experience that she wanted to relay. And sometimes she tells us that she says, don't go to Basra, as though somebody is going to read it and is deciding on what path to take to go to the pilgrimage. And she says, no, don't do that. That's right. But I'm not sure. I don't think, again, I don't know that she wanted us necessarily to have a certain kind of response to, or that there was, one particular reason why she decides to write it. I think she came from a family where people wrote their experiences, right? I mean, there are other ghazals, for instance, on the other page where I think it's her cousin who's writing. People wrote their experiences in poetry. And if you had a good pen, which she does, she's just the ease through which you heard the first opening baits, she has a real ease with which she uses the language. She doesn't, a lot of the men that you read at this time, so convoluted, and they try to make themselves, like poetic, right? But for her, it just seems like it comes so much from a natural space that she must have, she says, I love Nizomi. She must have read Nizomi. He is my favorite poem. She refers to herself as Majnoon. She's learned. And I'm like Majnoon. I'm going to go alone into the desert and lose myself in the desert. So this is a very cultivated individual. Yes.
You said like the use when talking about like these like intimate relationships between women, like the use of the term like lesbian would be like ahistorical. So I guess like when it comes to like lesbianism, like as an idea, like around like what like historical period did that like term really get applied like in the Persian
That's a really
world?
good question. So I think I would avoid using homosexual or lesbian because these are. You begin to have German and French writers, lawyers use the term in the end of the 20th century and the early 20th century, sorry. So 1890s, I think was the first time Ulrichs, a German, comes to use the term homosexual. Lesbian is much later. What they use is tribad. So it becomes a term, as I say, that's a category. Foucault writes about this very clearly. It's a legal category, but it's also a psychological category, right? So it comes to define a species, a way of life. And people did not categorize themselves in this fashion in this early modern period, right? The most I would say is that you see in these biographies of poets, so-and-so fell in love. Esh, asher is what is the term, fell in love with this young boy and just like would every day go to the coffee house to hang out with him. Sometimes you get in the biographies that they lived together, right? But it's not a way of life. It's not the kind of identifying categories that today, that's why I say we're too hung up with sex nowadays, because our identity is like, who do we have sex with? That's not how people were. And so to call her a lesbian or the king, a homosexual is, I would say, ahistorical, right? Like, sure, no, thank you for the question.
Many questions. But one quick question is, you mentioned that she may have had a scribe.
Yeah.
So is that a possibility? Because I mean, orality was so much part of the process. And could she have heard Nizami and then began to compose and had somebody scribe it, where her literacy was not, because I mean, there were some cases where I know this happened in some, like Khedive Egypt or Ottoman Egypt, where women were taught to read but not taught to write. And so there was so there might have been, so just aware to the extent of where, and maybe, and this is something I could be mistaken about, because sometimes I do make a comparison between the immediacy of folk poetry, which is oral, with the convolutedness of written poetry, which is written. And in a sense, sometimes the written conventions, I mean, even Ibn Khaldun talks about it. Sometimes he talks about that there is more poetry in the so-called illiterate poetry than there is in the written poetry. And some people attribute that to so I'm just wondering about that.
No, that's a really good question. I think, first of all, there's that one has to look at what's going on in the coffee houses in Isfahan and then in these majmuas. There's something about a recorded culture, right? The importance of writing, right? And one thing I can tell you is that there are, what becomes popular is letter writing to people, right? Outside of the diplomatic, of course. And a lot of the ghazal, which was probably oral, comes to shape the prose of the writing. And you have these manuals of letter writing that say, if you didn't have khat, if you didn't have writing,
Yeah.
then just copy down the opening address, right? And then put a stamp on and a mark, right? So they're already allowing for the possibility of men and women who didn't have handwriting, to, just do an opening, right? In her case, I think because she comes from a literate written recorded, right? I mean, there's like 800 pages of correspondences and poems of this family. I actually think that she was able to read and write, right? It's a speculation, but I think that they must have been. And so in the culture of coffee houses and poetry, you have this one guy, Urdubadi, who goes around, he hears a lot of poets that are just oral, that never have a divan, right? And he records it. He records 1 or 2 lines of it. And he says, so-and-so was the son of a laundromat and came to compose, left his father's job and came to compose poetry. You know that it's a period of time where the prestige of poetry and the socially expansive group of people who are having access to poetry or even composing is very large, right? And there's a lot of recording of people in these majmuas too. I think it's great for literary scholars to look at, because there's a lot of poets that have been lost, right? Because precisely as you're saying, it was an oral tradition. They were known in the city, in a particular coffee house, as reciting poetry, and they never made, their poems never made it to a recorded, let's say, even if it's in the majmua, not a divan. They're not that famous, or they haven't composed enough baits, right? That would make them a poet, right? Or considered to have an anthology of poetry.
Okay, the second question, and I have a third, which I hope not forget. The second question is just the arrangement of the narrative. So there's the husband dies, because I wasn't sure I got it correctly. The husband died. Then she meets this companion, and there is this.
No. The husband dies, and she decides to go on the pilgrimage.
Yes.
The companion was her Isfahani companion years before, she says. So here, right, as she comes out of Isfahan, very close to maybe 10 kilometers outside of Isfahan, is the tomb of her husband. She spends there one night. She cries, she sleeps. She talks about how the andalibs, the nightingales come. And so there's something emotional there too. And she leaves and she never talks about her husband anymore. It's only until she gets to Tabriz, where Urdubad, where her hometown, or her family's hometown, and her friend are living. And it's as if the proximity of space draws her, and she says in her language, draws her to go and visit her companion who's there.
Okay.
So that's the sequence is there, and then she stays there. And I think that what the narrative does, and that must be part of the poetic tradition, is that, bless you, it's that there's constantly, it's like as if you're bipolar. You go to a space, you gain peace, like she gains peace in Mecca, and the minute she leaves, the sorrow comes back, right? There's this kind of, Hafiz has this one poem about Yusuf gum gashte bazoyed bekan gam makhor, and it's very much this kind of melancholy, which is, I would say, a little bit psychologically, of course, that's a modern term. You come in and out of it, but that's the exigency of the poetry is such.
Now, has she made the decision to go to the Hajj before going to Urdubad or after?
Yeah, in Isfahan, the opening line, she says, I had no sleep. I was, in pain. And I decided that I'm going to, I take the destiny, I take it in my own hands. I know it's dangerous. I'm going to go to the pilgrimage. So there she's deciding to go, but she doesn't, the normal path would have been for her to go to Tabriz and cross into Anatolia, right? Or go south directly. And what she does is go further north. She moves away from what she had intention. She writes about it as though it was something that she really feels only in Tabriz.
The reason I'm asking, because this might sound like a double, those who know like Arabic poetry or classical Arabic poetry, that, you know, the every poem has to almost begin with the lost love. Yes. It's called nasib, which is you begin with this moment of the beloved has left you. In this case, you could say that the death of the husband is in a way. And then what you do with your life, you go on a journey.
Yes.
And that's where you learn about the world. And so you've learned that the loss of love is the first lesson of life. But the journey is the second one. You learn about the world. You learn about your heart, but then you know, and then you bring it all together one way or another. That's the and you still have that moment of like it sometimes, you know, in modern poetry or recitation or even singing, you have this allusion to seeing I call the scene of Atlan, which is the scene of the ruins. You say you have sometimes a singer would be singing and then would come back to that moment that's where the source of all the music comes from. But here, and I don't know if that tradition has kind of got into Farsi or not. But here you almost have you have a double. You have like a husband died. I'm going to go on a journey, but it is a journey to God. And then you see the old lover, and you have to almost take another journey. You're running from lost love twice here. Yeah. And but then she concludes it with saying, "Well, there is nothing to add to it. What is the journey?"
She goes back to that sorrow. That's why I think in a way, you know, it's manic. If we want to understand it in modern psychological terms, but I think that is part of that genre as well, that you never get rid of your melancholy. Even it's a momentary relief. But then, you know, when she talks about her visit towards her friend, that should have been a momentary relief, but she gets sick, right? And it's the friend who takes care of her is like a nurse, right? So, you know, there she's playing, I think, a little bit with the genre too, because, bless you, fulfillment would have been like Mecca is so fulfilling for her. But she talks about her family members who are also there. It's clearly knew about that story. And they comfort her when she has to leave. But again, the minute she leaves, she regrets having actually treated her companion in the way that she did, neglected her, right? Yeah. So there's never any resolution. And I think that that's part of, one can say is part of the poetry, but it's also how the poetry comes to shape your emotions, right? Because how do we learn how to and when to grieve and love? I mean, these are the kinds of spaces where they become our models.
Yeah, I think earlier, even with Chaucer, like how does he end the Canterbury Tales? I mean, it's maybe I don't know if it's part of like a kind of neoclassicism to force a conclusion on a text, but now people call that postmodern, where you don't have a conclusion. But in a sense, a lot of people didn't have a problem with not having to round things out or have the denouement. One last, you talked about homosexuality, is that there is a kind of a, I mean, the Arabic word habibi is it's not my love, it's my beloved, but it's also the male version of it. And I was listening to a song earlier today, and it is in the Libyan song. It says, "She gave something. I've suffered so much from her love, his love, and today he saw me." It's all in masculine, but the assumption is that even when people are listening, the assumption is that it is a female. So there's that element of the masculinized beloved, even though the assumption is female. The other one with the element of the homosexuality is that the word Habibi is very common use now in Arabic. I think it's in the 20th century much more than before, and it's so said to male companions with complete sort of the homosexuality has this like very glass wall where there is love, but the glass wall is intercourse. That there is an intimacy goes to as deep as it can between males, but the sexuality is the part that's separate. That is that's not gonna, that's like the love that can't call its name. So in a sense, that may be sort of the promises of it, but then the language is pointing towards love between male and male as very much one, even when it's assumed to be female. So again, I'm seeing you look at your pronouns, you are using
there's no gender in Persian.
So okay.
That makes it different. In that, unlike Arabic and Turkish, we don't have gender.
Yes.
And so it's that gender neutrality, I think, is also allows for a lot of that kind of ambiguity. I mean, sometimes it's very clear where they're referring to, a female or a male. But what is even more confusing is that beauty is not gendered. Right? I mean, I think premodern miniatures that you see, here is a male and here is a female. All of the characteristics of the male and the female are exactly the same. And so that also adds to, that ambiguity and those possibilities, right? Yeah. I mean, there's a very great, my colleague Urdubadi has written about it. Men with women with mustaches and men without beards. In the Qajar period for women, I mean, depilation is a modern thing, right? We grow mustaches too. And it was considered very beautiful for women to grow mustaches. It's very much in this contact with the West when there's the sense of when the male who loves male, Amrad, the one who shaves the beard, right, who refuses to enter into the stage of manhood, right, who can never then no longer engage in these kind of acts of sodomy, right, that becomes a big confusion. Facial hair becomes a big confusion for desire in the European context, because there's the Iranian traveler who goes to Paris and he sees, well, all these men are shaved. What does it mean that they're actually amrad, right? And so there is a self-consciousness about women having to depilate their mustaches and men to allow for the beard to grow so that it's very distinct that they are adult men who are now muhsina, right? Who no longer have gone through the stage of their life where they've have desired young men.
Well, but the drawings is some of these young male figures. When you look at the older guy, he's bent. He's the picture of him is bent, so that suggests his age. When you have the king, he's not. He doesn't have like roundness in the way that his companion does. So, is there a sense that these younger men are kind of feminized? That they're like,
so I would, also say
here that
here.
See, like that one, it seems like that both of these figures that are male, but they seem to have like kind of feminine features in some ways. Like
see, that's where you have to realize that gender is historically constructed. What we see today as feminine, they didn't, right? This is just, so first of all, the beauty of this young male is like the beauty of a woman, right? Because she also doesn't have a younger woman, right? She doesn't have the mustache that hormones have when women grow older. So I think that when I teach, my classes on gender and sexuality, I actually ask my students to be leery of imposing our sense of what masculine and feminine is onto.
Okay. But if we go to the king.
Let's go to the king. The king is special because, of course, he has authority, but even there, you're right that Muhammad Qasim, the painter, wants to show, I think, some kind of intimacy there, not only because the king is, hugging the cupbearer, but he's leaning towards the cupbearer. And there you totally see, if you compare it with, portraits of a man and a woman, you see that usually the husband and wife, the husband will, have his head out. The woman would be the one who's leaning. So you're absolutely right to read some emotions there, or again, some agency, or in this case, intimacy. Yeah, because the king shouldn't be depicted in this kind of manner where he's really leaning towards and actually embracing, but there's clearly no sense. So why do you don't say that he's not feminine because of his mustache?
No, just this is my eyes, like the shape of the bottom shape of the young man, and the waistline of the king is kind of thinner, and it doesn't seem. So that's what. But maybe it's the association with youth is that youth is plump. Perhaps.
Yeah, I think there's something about the fullness of youth, right? So the beauty of how a male at a certain adolescent enters into the fullest of.
This was thought of as beautiful. Like to be plump is to be beautiful.
Well, definitely not the same kind of skinniness as today.
No, certainly.
The women are also depicted as, I mean, they're endowed. Let's say.
Like in classical Arabic poetry, the woman who has difficulty getting up has to use her hands to get up. With like round ankles, that's the beautiful. That's a beautiful.
Those were the days.
So I wonder if it's the plumpness rather than necessarily the gender that becomes an indication of beauty.
Well, what I needed to do was also just to give you, because I think what we need to do is actually create an archive of all these images together of male and female to see again these representations, to be able to decode.
And youth and age, and also the representation of youth and age, how they're indicated, because it may be youth is indicated for males and females the same way, rather than differently.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry I took so long.
Great questions. Thank you so much.
It was. I think you had your hand up again, or somebody else had their hand up.
The posture is very suggestive.
It's very evocative. Yes, definitely.
And the knees, coming out of the skirt.
Yeah.
With
it's erotic.
Very
totally erotic. Yeah.
The skirt is not gendered because everybody dressed that.
Everybody was dressed that.
Even the belt is both.
Yeah. No, that's male and female garb. Yeah, definitely.
One last question for the road. No. Okay. Well, thank you, Kathryn. Thank you very much. We're gonna stay with the sexual and the scandalous for next week as well.